Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
We're Aaron and Dave Tashin, co-hosts of the Mindful Educators podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey EduMagicians, it's Sam, and before we start into this episode, I want to share with you about an amazing resource. It's called the Educator Candidate Member Portal. AAEE provides you with resources such as virtual job fairs, a job board, interview tips and prep, resume building, webinars. You can even get a copy of the Job Search Handbook digitally. So head on over to aaee.org and create your free Educator Candidate Member account today. Friends, one more thing before we get started. This episode is brought to you by my new course, Digital Portfolios from Scratch to Interview Ready. Head on over to sfessich.com/courses for more information about this self-paced, hands-on virtual workshop. Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic Podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and as you know, I bring on guests almost every week to share about their teaching story. And today, I have with me Jason Reagin. You might know him as the design guy, and he's an international teacher over in Korea. And Jason, I'm so excited to have you on our show today because I'm excited for you to share your journey and what brought you into international education, and then also some tips for our future teachers out there who might be interested in it as well. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Sam. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. And for those of you wondering, yes, there is a time difference. It is 7 a.m. Eastern, and it is almost 8 p.m. In the evening for Jason. So thank you so much for making some time in your schedule to share your story with us today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Perfect. All right, Jason, let's start off with your teaching story. What brought you into education? What did you study? Where did you go? And what are you currently doing in education now?
Well, that's a long journey. I don't know how long you've got, but I'll try to make it as concise as possible. So I'm actually originally from Atlanta, Georgia. And so I grew up there, and I went to Valdosta State University, which is way down in South Georgia. And I studied radio and television production. And after about 2 or 3 months of working in a television station after I graduated, making minimum wage, I thought to myself, why did I go to college to make minimum wage and to work the late shift? And so I decided, you know what, maybe it's time for me to look at some other paths and things like that. And it just so happened that my brother, ironically or coincidentally, was studying at the University of Georgia to become a technology education teacher. And he and I were talking on the phone, and he said, hey, you should come up and talk to my professor. And so I took a few days and drove up to Athens and visited with his professor, and it just so happened that we had this lottery grant that helped for teachers going into critical needs field. They would pay for your master's degree and basically grant you the entire amount if you just taught in the state for a certain amount of years after you graduated. And so I took that on, and I studied what was called technological studies at the time. It's now what we would call STEM or technology, or engineering and technology type things. And so, but a lot of the things I studied were formerly what industrial arts teachers taught and shop teachers and things like that, but it had evolved. And so I graduated and started teaching in a high school. And after a few months of working, I was in an inner city school in Atlanta. And while I enjoyed it, I just was not fulfilled like I thought I would be. And I was driving home one day, and I heard an ad on NPR about teaching English in China. And so I thought to myself, that might actually be something I could get behind. And so I contacted the company, and that next year I taught for a year in Beijing. And it was just the farthest thing I could possibly imagine from what I'd ever experienced. And so at that point, I kind of got the bug for living overseas. And I discovered then that there was this whole magical world of international schools, which at the time I had no idea really existed. And so that was sort of my goal then. I then knew that was 20 years ago. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So, of course, I had to go back to my home state and pay off my loan. And so the way I did that was teaching a few more years in Georgia. And then not long after that, after a couple of years, I was really quite keen to get back overseas. And so I got a job again in China in a different city. And I went and taught English again for a year. And I actually met my wife, who's also an English teacher, but she's from China. And we embarked on a very long journey at that point in teaching international schools. And I got involved in international baccalaureate schools. And I discovered that international baccalaureate schools for middle and high school were teaching the same kind of subject that I was teaching at home, but it was a much more open curriculum. I had a lot of flexibility and autonomy to do what I wanted to do. I didn't have a set of standards that I had to follow daily, for example. I had more of a framework. And so that's where I kind of got into what I'm currently doing now. And so I've lived in China. I lived in China for over 10 years. I lived in Bermuda for some time, back in the States, and then I'm in South Korea. I'm in my 4th year in South Korea. And I'm currently teaching design, which is what we would call STEM or STEAM in a lot of public schools. But I also am the coordinator for what's called the IB career-related program. And so it's for grade 11 and 12 students, and they have different pathways that they pick in school. So it would be a lot like a dual enrollment student in high schools at home. So a lot of our students will study things like film and media arts or engineering or sustainable fashion and different things like that. And they study those online as well as having their normal classes in high school. And so I organize that program, and I'm really excited to be doing that. And so that's what I currently am doing. It's working with that, but it's all sort of centered around the teaching and the thinking behind design and design thinking.
That's a beautiful story. I love how I didn't know where it was going to go next. And it just goes to show you never know where a teaching degree can take you, no matter like the subject, the grade level, or the location.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's been a journey that I know teaching in a public school at home I never would have had. I'm sure I would have been quite fulfilled, but I know that this is normal for me at this point, and normal for my family and normal for my kids, where I think being in one place doing the same thing every day would not be normal. They would think that was abnormal.
So Jason, for some of our listeners out there who are thinking about teaching internationally, what tips do you have for them to get started or to even, start broaching that subject?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, actually, I get that question a lot through different social media, folks reaching out through social media and different things. And I would say that the field for the gameplay is a lot more even now than it used to be. So 20 years ago, when I was trying to break into the international scene, it was really like a fraternity in a sense. It was a secret society, and you had to have the special handshake or the knock.
I was going to say, is there a handshake we should know about?
Not quite anymore. But it's really opened up now a lot more because of so many companies that travel overseas with their employees, and they take their whole families because people are happier when they're with their family. And so middle managers and companies and things, they'll bring their whole family somewhere. And so I would say that the first thing is there are a lot of opportunities out there for first-time teachers as interns or apprentice or new teachers in a lot of schools. A lot of them have brought them on. My own school even has an apprenticeship type program where they'll pay. It's not the full pay that you would get as a full-time teacher, but you're paid basically to intern in the school for a year or two just to get your feet wet and to be with a master teacher and to really learn the craft of good teaching. And so there are schools out there that will do that. There's not a lot, but there are some. There are job fairs that you can attend. Obviously, this year, I think most of the job fairs will be virtual, which will actually be even better. Yeah, it's even better now because before you had to travel either to London or to Melbourne or to Boston for these job fairs. And now I think they'll be online, which I think will actually even make this field even flatter for folks, which will be fantastic. And, what's nice is, they cover not only your expenses and your salary, but your flight home every summer and your housing expenses and those kinds of things. And so in a lot of countries, you're paying a local tax, which is much lower than a U.S. income tax. And so, and at being out of the country for a certain number of days in a year, you are then exempt from certain kinds of taxes in the U.S. because you've paid them in the other country you live in, and so there's some advantages for that. We don't do it for that reason. We do it because we really enjoy the diversity that my children experience by being around kids from 50 or 60 different nations. We enjoy the travel when we have travel. Right now we're kind of stuck, but when we could travel, it was great to be able to go places and show our children things that they would never have a chance to see any other way. And also I find that a lot of the things that happen in public schools, especially in North America, all of the bureaucracy and the red tape doesn't exist in international schools necessarily because it's a service to these people who are paying pretty big premiums for their kids to go to a high quality school. So it really, what you do is very purposeful. Not that it's not purposeful in a public school, but smaller class sizes, facilities are very often a lot nicer. And then additionally, you get to work with some really fascinating people from all over the world. So those are things that keep drawing us to doing it. We've been away from home since December, and knowing that we could get home if we had to, but it would be quite a chore. There's that. But normally it would be more of just the distance of travel from door to door. From here to home would be 24 to 30 hours, depending on how many layovers you had. So there's that, which I know is a first world problem. But language and culture, I see them as a positive, but many people who travel overseas and work overseas, that's their first big barrier when something happens that they've never experienced before, and then they don't know how to ask for help. Or there's the exchange rate, and there's the different way of doing banking, and how do you get a SIM card for your phone? And so just the daily ins and outs of, just daily life. You have to be comfortable with being flexible. So if you're a person who is really into routine, I don't know if living overseas is the thing for you. But if you do enjoy a sense of adventure and trying new things and being around new people and allowing your world to be a bit more open, then living overseas is great. And there are some issues with, depending on where you live, with healthcare and with safety sometimes. South Korea is not that. We're very, very safe here, and the healthcare is fantastic. So it's almost the best of both worlds. Most people speak English. But, there's other things too that happen. It's very hard to, sometimes it's a very insular society, so it's hard to make lots of local friends until you have broken into that scene with some other local friends. They kind of vouch for you kind of thing. So there are things that, are drawbacks. It is isolating. I will say that people who have partners or have children as well tend to do a little better because they have their own network at home. They can go home after a long day. Singles, unless they're really adventurous and outgoing and are fine with, flexibility, like I said, it's a little more difficult sometimes. But I knew a lot of single teachers who have been doing this their entire career. So, it is something that you have to be away from home. So you have to be okay with being away from your family for rather long lengths of time, and so that's probably something too to consider. But most international schools, your initial contract is 2 to 3 years, and so you do have that to know that after 2 years, if I don't like it, I can go home. So there is that, and then usually schools will one up on an annual basis, and so there is some security in knowing you could always go home, but there's some insecurity in knowing, wait a minute, after this year, you might not offer me a contract. What is that all about? So there are some drawbacks there as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you so much for sharing those. That really gives a nice picture, paints a nice picture of what it means to teach internationally without actually going international just yet, just thinking about the idea. So, Jason, you know that this is a podcast for future teachers. What advice do you have for them in general as they're working through their college careers to become educators of excellence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that COVID has taught us that being flexible and flipped classroom type situations is key. And so I think making sure you have as many tools in your toolbox to access is paramount. And having a growth mindset, I think, is incredibly important as well, not being too fixed in your way of doing things. And so that has been the biggest struggle for a lot of the teachers I've noticed, is just having a really fixed mindset of this is the only way you can do it. And then what's been beautiful is seeing a lot of these teachers who might seem fossilized really adapt and grow into new roles and new places. And so I think being adaptable and flexible, no matter where you are, is incredibly important. And I think too, not going to the faculty lounge too often. And that's probably my most important piece of advice.
So being flexible, having that growth mindset is key no matter where you teach internationally, in the States, wherever you're going to be. And I think that's a great trait of an educator of excellence, being flexible and having that growth mindset. Now, Jason, I would be remiss if we didn't mention your show. Could you share a little bit about your podcast and where we can all find you, find your podcast, and then also find you online in case we have questions?
Thanks so much, Sam. Yeah. So several years ago, I started a podcast just to help people out like myself who design teachers are often alone in their school. They're usually a kind of an island to themselves. And so I just thought, let's have a place where people can gather and share the ideas. And so I have a podcast called Designcast, and it can be found on Anchor or any of the other major places you listen to podcasts. And so it's expanded out to where it's no longer just about that one subject. We talk about professional development. We talk about future trends in education and different programs that I'm interested in at the moment. And so I like to access a lot of the people that I've met from around the world in different places with all the traveling I've done. And we just have conversations about what's going on in their world. A lot of them are either mid-career or late career as educators, and so they have a lot to share. And so it's fantastic to have these folks on and just to have a great conversation with them. And then if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and all of those, and even Instagram with all 4 or 5 people who follow me. But yeah, but my Twitter is DISKO. N, the number 4, and then NO, Disco Inferno. It's from my gaming days.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's me.
That's great. That's really great. So friends, wherever you subscribe to this show, make sure you subscribe to Jason's as well. It really is a show with a lot of practical tips and strategies that you can implement even as a first-year teacher or in student teaching. So I encourage you to check that out if you're looking for some more inspiration for education and teaching and excellence. Jason, I want to thank you for your time today. And thank you so much for sharing with my audience all about your teaching journey and tips for international teaching, and also where we can find you online. Thank you so much for your time today. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us in on this conversation. And remember, you have the Edu Magic within you.
And there you have it, Edu Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more Edu Magic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.